The inheritance lawyer's voice crackled through the phone at 7 in the morning, informing Xavier Ramsey that his uncle had died and left him a bookshop in a town he had never heard of, which was possibly the strangest thing anyone had ever told him before he had even finished his coffee. Xavier sat in his penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, staring at the skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, trying to process what he had just heard. His Uncle Martin, a man he had met exactly twice in his entire 32 years of life, had somehow decided Xavier was the perfect person to inherit his independent bookshop in Millbrook, Connecticut. Xavier ran a billion-dollar commercial real estate empire. He bought buildings, demolished them, and built gleaming towers in their place. Books were something he read on flights between meetings, and bookshops were quaint relics he occasionally noticed when walking to important dinners. But the lawyer had been clear. The will specified that Xavier had to take possession of the property within 30 days, or it would be sold and the proceeds donated to charity. Xavier had already mentally cataloged the value of commercial property in small Connecticut towns, which was minimal but not nothing. He would drive up, sign whatever papers needed signing, put the place on the market, and be back in the city by dinner. That was 3 days ago. Now Xavier stood on a tree-lined street in Millbrook, looking at a narrow brick building wedged between a coffee shop and what appeared to be a vintage clothing store. The sign above the door read Ramsey's Books in faded gold letters, and the window display featured a tumbling pile of paperbacks arranged around a handwritten sign that said, "Beach reads in February because winter is terrible." Xavier tried the door. Locked. He checked his watch. 9:15 on a Thursday morning. What kind of business was closed at 9:15 on a Thursday? He peered through the window, cupping his hands against the glass. The interior was dim, but he could make out shelves crammed with books, a wooden counter with an old-fashioned cash register, and more books stacked on every available surface. "We open at 10, a voice said behind him. Xavier turned to find a woman standing there with a canvas bag slung over her shoulder and a travel mug in her hand. She wore jeans, boots, and a thick cardigan the color of autumn leaves. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was looking at him with an expression that hovered between curious and annoyed. "I'm not a customer," Xavier said. "I'm Xavier Ramsey. I inherited this place from Martin Ramsey." The woman's eyes widened slightly and something flickered across her face too quickly for him to identify. "Oh, you're the nephew from New York." "Yes, and you are." "Tessa Knight. I manage the store, or I did anyway." She shifted her bag higher on her shoulder. "I guess I don't know what I do anymore." There was an awkward pause. Xavier was used to awkward pauses in negotiations, used to letting silence stretch until the other person felt compelled to fill it. But Tessa just looked at him steadily, waiting. "Can we go inside?" he finally asked. "Sure." Tessa moved past him, close enough that he caught the scent of vanilla and old paper, and unlocked the door. A bell chimed as they entered, and she flipped on the lights. The bookshop came to life around them. It was smaller than it had looked from outside, but somehow it felt larger, the way spaces do when they are crammed with interesting things. The shelves reached toward the ceiling, and a rolling ladder on brass rails provided access to the higher levels. There were reading nooks tucked into corners, a table stacked with staff recommendations, and a slightly threadbare armchair positioned near the window with a reading lamp beside it. And on the wall behind the counter, Xavier saw something that made him stop mid-step. It was a large piece of butcher paper, the kind you might use for art projects, tacked directly to the wall. At the top, written in colorful markers, were the words "Tessa's List of Mistakes." Below that, In what appeared to be chronological order was a numbered list written in different colored inks, as though entries had been added over time. Xavier found himself reading without meaning to. 1. Ordered 500 copies of a cookbook about fermented vegetables instead of 50. Had fermented vegetable recipes for 3 years. 2. Told Mrs. Henderson her book club pick was aggressively boring. She was right there. I said it to her face. 3. Alphabetized the mystery section by title instead of author. Took 6 weeks to fix. Customers still ask me if I'm okay. 4. Fell off the ladder reaching for a book and knocked over the Valentine's Day display. Spent 2 hours picking up chocolate kisses. Ate most of them. 5. Accidentally ordered books for a different bookstore's event. Hosted the event anyway. Author never knew. The list continued down the page. 23 entries in total, each one a small confession of imperfection. Xavier had never seen anything like it in a business setting. In his world, mistakes were buried, spun, or blamed on someone else. They were certainly not displayed on the wall in cheerful handwriting. "That's private," Tessa said, though she didn't sound particularly embarrassed. Xavier turned to look at her. She had set her bag down and was pulling off her cardigan, revealing a simple black T-shirt underneath. "Why is it on the wall?" Martin's idea. He said that being ashamed of mistakes made them heavier, but writing them down and hanging them up made them lighter. Also, customers think it's funny. It's become sort of a thing. People come in and ask what new mistakes I've made. She moved behind the counter and started booting up an ancient-looking computer. "So, are you here to close the store?" "I'm here to assess the property and determine next steps." That's corporate speak for yes. Xavier felt a flicker of irritation. "I run a real estate investment company. I don't run bookshops, particularly not bookshops in small towns in Connecticut." "Right, of course." Tessa's voice was flat. She did not look at him, focused instead on the computer screen. When what? When do I need to be out? When does this place get bulldozed so you can put up condos or a parking garage or whatever it is you do?" "I don't bulldoze bookshops," Xavier said, though he absolutely had bulldozed bookshops, or at least buildings that had once housed bookshops. "And I am not making any decisions today. I am simply here to understand what I have inherited." Tessa finally looked at him. Her eyes were gray-green, the color of the ocean before a storm. "You inherited a 70-year-old independent bookstore that barely breaks even most months, but serves a community of people who actually give a damn about rating. You inherited a place that hosts book clubs and writing groups and story time for kids every Saturday morning. You inherited something that matters to people, even if it doesn't matter to you." The words hung in the air between them. Xavier was not used to being spoken to this way. People who worked for him were deferential. People who wanted things from him were ingratiating. This woman who was about to lose her job was neither. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 6 years, since I was 22. "And before that I was in college, and before that I was in high school, and before that I was a child." "Are we doing my whole life story, or can I open the store now? We have customers who actually show up at 10. Xavier decided he had never met anyone quite like Tessa Knight. He also decided that he found her somewhat infuriating. He also decided, in a much quieter part of his mind that he was not ready to examine, that she was beautiful in an unfussy, real way that was completely unlike the women he usually encountered. "I will stay for a few days," he said. "To understand the business, you will show me how things work." "I will show you how things work," Tessa repeated slowly, "so you can write a better sales listing, so I can make an informed decision." Tessa studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Fine, but you have to actually work. I'm not giving you a tour. If you're going to be here, You're going to be useful. And that was how Xavier Ramsey, who had not shelved a book since his high school library volunteer hours, found himself spending his Thursday morning learning the layout of Ramsey's books. Tessa was a thorough, if somewhat impatient teacher. She showed him the organizational system, which was part Dewey Decimal and part where Martin thought things should go. She explained the inventory software, which was decades old and held together with what appeared to be hope and determination. She introduced him to the regular customers who came in, a rotating cast of characters who all seemed to know each other and who all looked at Xavier with varying degrees of suspicion. "That's Dorothy," Tessa said, nodding toward an elderly woman browsing the romance section. "She reads a book a day and has opinions about everything. Don't recommend anything to her unless you have read it personally. She will quiz you." "That's Marcus. He only reads military history and always pays in exact change. He counts it out very slowly." "That's the book club crew. They meet every Wednesday night and drink wine from coffee mugs because we don't have a liquor license. I pretend not to notice." Xavier absorbed this information, filing it away the way he filed away details about properties and markets and investment opportunities. Except this felt different somehow. These were not data points. These were people, and they cared about this place in a way that was difficult to quantify. At noon, Tessa disappeared into the back room and returned with 2 sandwiches wrapped in paper and 2 bottles of water. "I always bring lunch," she explained, handing him one of the sandwiches. "The coffee shop next door makes them, turkey and avocado. If you don't like it, there's a deli 2 blocks down." Xavier unwrapped the sandwich. It looked completely normal and smelled good. "This is fine, thank you." They ate standing behind the counter because the single chair was occupied by a teenager who had been reading the same manga for 45 minutes without any indication that he planned to purchase it. "You always let people read without buying?" Xavier asked quietly. "That's literally the point of a bookstore," Tessa said. "You raid things, you discover what you like, you buy things. Sometimes you just read because you need somewhere to be. That kid comes in 3 times a week. His parents fight a lot. This is quiet." Xavier looked at the teenager again, seeing him differently now. "That seems like poor business. That seems like being human." They finished eating in silence. Xavier was composing an email on his phone when Tessa spoke again. "Why did Martin leave this place to you? I don't mean that rudely. I just mean you obviously didn't know each other well." Xavier looked up from his phone. "I have no idea. I met him twice. Once at a family funeral when I was 16 and once at another family funeral when I was 25. We barely spoke either time." "Huh." Tessa was wiping down the counter, not looking at him. "He talked about you sometimes." "He did. He said you were brilliant and driven and that you had built something from nothing. He was proud of you, I think, even though you were practically strangers. He showed me an article about you once from a business magazine. You were buying some historic building in Boston." Xavier remembered that deal. It had been contentious. Preservationists had protested. He had won anyway, as he usually did. "He never contacted me about any of that." Martin was not great at reaching out to people, but he paid attention from a distance. I think maybe that was his way. Tessa looked at him directly. "I think maybe he wanted to give you something that was not about money or business, something that was just about being human." The words settled over Xavier like snow, quiet and accumulating. Before he could respond, the door chimed and a woman rushed in, breathless and frazzled. "Tessa, thank God. Do you have that book about grief? The one with the blue cover?" "My sister is going through something and I need to give her something helpful and I don't know what and you always know what." Tessa moved immediately, coming around the counter with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "I know exactly what you need. Come with me." Xavier watched as Tessa led the woman to a section of the store, speaking in low, comforting tones. She pulled 3 books from the shelf, explaining something about each one. The woman held them like lifelines, nodding, wiping her eyes. When they returned to the counter, Tessa wrapped the books in brown paper and wrote something on the package with a marker. The woman left looking marginally less shattered than when she had entered. "What did you write on the package?" Xavier asked. Tessa looked at the marker in her hand. "I wrote you are not alone, because she is not, and sometimes people need to be reminded of that." Xavier did not know what to say to that. In his world, transactions were clean and impersonal. You bought, you sold, you moved on. This was something else entirely, something that felt almost sacred. The afternoon continued in much the same way. Xavier helped where he could, which was mostly shelving returns and trying not to get in the way. He observed Tessa, the way she knew exactly where every book was, the way she listened to what people were not saying and found them exactly what they needed. He started to understand that this was not just a store. It was a kind of community center, a refuge, a place where people came to find parts of themselves they had lost. At 6 o'clock, Tessa locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone deep tired that comes from caring too much for too long. "You did good today," she said, and Xavier felt an absurd flush of pride at the simple praise. Most people from the corporate world can't handle actual customer service. "I am not entirely useless," Xavier said dryly. "Jury's still out." But she almost smiled when she said it, and Xavier decided that was progress. "Can I buy you dinner?" The words came out before Xavier had fully thought them through. "To thank you for teaching me today." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me on a date, or is this a professional courtesy?" "Professional courtesy," Xavier said quickly, though he was not entirely sure that was true. "There's a good Italian place 2 streets over, Giulia's. I'll meet you there at 7:30. That gives me time to go home and convince myself this is not a terrible idea." She left before Xavier could respond, the bell chiming cheerfully behind her. Xavier stood in the empty bookshop, surrounded by thousands of stories, and wondered what story he was walking into. Giulia's turned out to be a small restaurant with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, and the smell of garlic and basil heavy in the air. Xavier arrived first and was shown to a table by the window. He had changed from his work clothes into dark jeans and a navy sweater, and he felt oddly nervous in a way he had not felt in years. Tessa arrived exactly at 7:30, wearing a dress for the first time since he had met her. It was simple, dark green, and she had left her hair down so that it fell past her shoulders in soft waves. Xavier stood when she approached, an old-fashioned gesture that made her pause. "Professional courtesy," she said, a teasing note in her voice as she sat down. "Absolutely," Xavier agreed, though looking at her in the candlelight made him reconsider every professional boundary he had ever maintained. They ordered wine and pasta, and for a while they made small talk about the restaurant and the town and nothing particularly important. But as the meal progressed and the wine relaxed the edges between them, the conversation deepened. "Tell me why you do this," Xavier said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the bookshop. "You are clearly intelligent and capable. You could work anywhere." "Why a small bookstore that barely breaks even?" Tessa twirled pasta around her fork, considering. "When I was 14, my mom died. Car accident, very sudden, very awful, and I sort of fell apart for a while. I stopped doing homework, stopped talking to friends, just kind of existed. And then one day my dad dragged me to Ramsey's books because he had to pick up a special order. And while he was talking to Martin, I just wandered around looking at all these books about all these different lives, all these different ways of being human. and Martin came over and asked me what I liked to read, and I said I did not know any more because everything felt pointless. And he said that was a very honest answer and he respected that. And then he handed me a book and said, "Try this. If it does not help, come back and we will try another one." "What was the book?" Xavier asked. "A Tree Grows in Brooklyn," about a girl surviving poverty and hardship in early 20th century New York. And I read it, and it did not fix anything, but it made me feel less alone. So I went back, and Martin gave me another book, and then another. And slowly I started putting myself back together, one story at a time. Martin never made me talk about what I was going through. He just kept giving me books like they were medicine, and in a way they were. Tessa looked at Xavier, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. "So that's why I do this. Because Martin saved me with stories, and now I get to do that for other people. I get to hand someone a book and say, 'Try this. Maybe it will help,' and sometimes it does." Xavier felt something crack open inside him, some carefully constructed wall he had built between himself and the messy emotional reality of other people. "That is a good reason," he said quietly. "What about you?" Tessa asked. "Why do you do what you do?" "Buy buildings, knock them down, build new ones." It was a fair question, and Xavier tried to formulate an answer that was true. "I grew up with nothing. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep us in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens. I wore second-hand clothes and ate free lunch at school and understood very early that money was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that kept you safe. So I worked and studied and clawed my way into business school and then into the world of commercial real estate. And I was good at it. I understood how to see potential in things other people overlooked. I built an empire from nothing, and now I am safe in a way I never was as a child." "But are you happy?" Tessa asked. No one had ever asked Xavier that question. Successful, yes. Powerful, yes. Wealthy, obviously. But happy? "I do not think about happiness," he finally said. "I think about security and achievement and growth. That sounds lonely." "It is efficient." Tessa laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise both of them. "You sound like a robot, a very successful, very lonely robot." "I am not lonely," Xavier protested, but even as he said it, he knew it was not entirely true. He had colleagues and employees, and a rotating series of brief, unsatisfying relationships. But he could not remember the last time he had connected with someone the way he was connecting with Tessa, right now, across a checkered tablecloth in a small Italian restaurant in Connecticut. They finished their meal and walked back toward the bookshop, where Xavier had left his car. The night was cold and clear, and their breath made clouds in the air between them. "Thank you for dinner," Tessa said when they reached the store, "and for helping today. Even if you are ultimately going to sell this place and break my heart, I appreciate that you are at least trying to understand it first." "I have not made any decisions yet," Xavier said. "But you will. People like you always do. You will calculate the return on investment and realize that keeping a barely profitable bookshop makes no financial sense, and you will sell it to someone who will turn it into luxury apartments or a chain pharmacy. And I will have to find another job, and the town will lose something important, and that will be that." Her voice was matter-of-fact, not accusatory, which somehow made it worse. "You do not know me well enough to know what I will do," Xavier said. "Maybe not. But I know what makes sense in your world, and this place does not make sense." She pulled her keys from her bag. "Good night, Xavier. I will see you tomorrow if you are still slumming it with us small-town folk." She walked away before he could respond, and Xavier stood in the cold watching her disappear around the corner. He sat in his car for a long time before driving back to the hotel, thinking about mistakes written on walls and books as medicine, and the difference between being successful and being happy. Xavier returned to the bookshop every day for the next week. He told himself it was due diligence, a necessary step in making an informed business decision. He did not examine too closely why he kept staying later each day, why he found excuses to make Tessa laugh, why he had started to memorize the way she chewed her bottom lip when she was thinking. He learned the rhythms of the store, the morning rush of commuters grabbing something for the train, the quiet mid-morning hours when serious readers came to browse, the after-school influx of teenagers, the evening book club meetings and author events. He met the other part-time employee, a college student named Jenna who worked weekend shifts. He learned about the author who came in every Friday to write in the corner and who had become a local celebrity after her debut novel hit the bestseller list. He discovered that the bookshop had a cat named Hemingway who appeared and disappeared according to his own mysterious schedule, and he watched Tessa, the way she moved through the space like it was an extension of herself, the way she remembered every customer's name and preferences, the way she added a 24th item to her mistake list after accidentally ordering 12 copies of a book about breeding goats. "I have never seen anything like that list," Xavier said one afternoon when the store was quiet. They were sitting behind the counter, Tessa doing inventory on a clipboard and Xavier pretending to review financial documents on his laptop. "It is weird, I know," Tessa said without looking up. "It is honest. I spend most of my professional life watching people pretend they have never made a mistake, watching them blame others or make excuses. That list is radical in its honesty." Tessa set down her pen and looked at him. "Martin said that shame grows in the dark. He said that if you drag your mistakes into the light and look at them directly, they lose their power over you. The list started as a joke after I made that fermented vegetable disaster, but then it became something more. It became a reminder that you can mess up and still be okay. That imperfection is not the same as failure." "What was Martin like?" Xavier asked. "Really like?" Tessa smiled, a sad, affectionate expression. "He was kind, genuinely kind in a way that is rare. He was also stubborn and disorganized, and he made terrible coffee. He knew more about books than anyone I have ever met, and he genuinely believed that reading made people better. Not smarter necessarily, but better, more empathetic, more human. He died doing what he loved, you know. Heart attack while shelving books in the history section. Jenna found him. It was awful, but also, I think if Martin could have chosen, that is how he would have wanted to go. Surrounded by stories." Xavier felt a pang of regret for the relationship he had never built with this man, this uncle who had somehow seen something in him worth remembering in a will. "I wish I had known him," Xavier said. "I wish you had too." The moment stretched between them, waited with things unsaid. Then the door chimed and a customer entered and the moment broke. That night, Xavier stayed late to help Tessa close up. They worked in comfortable silence, straightening shelves and resetting displays. Xavier was putting chairs back in place when he noticed a framed photograph on the wall behind the counter that he had not seen before. It showed Martin, much younger, standing in front of the bookshop with a woman Xavier assumed was his wife. "That was taken 40 years ago," Tessa said, noticing his gaze. "Opening day. Martin and Sarah. She died before I started working here, but Martin talked about her all the time. He said she was the one who convinced him to open the store. She believed in impossible dreams." "It is an impossible dream, is it not?" Xavier asked. "Keeping an independent bookstore alive in the age of online retailers and e-readers. Maybe. But some things are worth doing even if they are impossible, maybe especially if they are impossible." Tessa turned off the main lights, leaving only the small lamp behind the counter. In the dimness, The store looked different, almost magical, like it existed slightly outside of regular time. "Are you going back to New York soon?" "I do not know," Xavier said honestly. "Your business must be falling apart without you. I have excellent people working for me. They can manage without me for a while. So you are staying because—" Xavier looked at her, at this woman who wrote her mistakes on the wall and gave books to grieving people, and made him question everything he thought he knew about what mattered in life. "Because I am not finished here yet," he said. Tessa held his gaze, and Xavier saw something shift in her expression, a wall coming down or a door opening. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." They stood there in the quiet bookshop, surrounded by 1,000 stories, and Xavier thought that maybe he was starting to become part of one. The following week brought a cold snap, the kind of bitter February weather that made people hurry from building to building with their heads down against the wind. Business slowed to a trickle, and Xavier spent more time actually talking to Tessa rather than just observing her work. He learned that she had studied English literature in college with vague plans of becoming a teacher. But then Martin had offered her the manager position, and it felt right in a way that nothing else had. He learned that she lived alone in a small apartment 3 blocks from the bookshop, that she was an adequate cook and a terrible baker, that she had a younger brother who was in medical school and who she called every Sunday. He told her about his mother, who had died 5 years ago right as his company was taking off, never quite believing that her son had become someone important. He told her about the pressure of maintaining success, the constant need to prove himself, the way winning had become the only metric he knew how to measure his life by. "That sounds exhausting," Tessa said. They were sitting in the reading nook by the window, ostensibly sorting through a box of used books someone had donated, but mostly just talking. "It is all I know," Xavier said. "That does not mean it is all you can know." Before Xavier could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and saw a message from his CFO. A major deal was stalling. They needed him back in New York. There were decisions that had to be made. Tessa saw his expression change. "You have to go." "I should go." "There is a difference between should and have to." Xavier looked at his phone, then at Tessa, then at the bookshop around them. 2 weeks ago the choice would have been automatic, but now everything felt complicated. "Come with me," he said suddenly. Tessa blinked. "What?" "Come to New York with me, just for the day. I need to handle some things at the office, but then we could get dinner. I could show you the city." "I have seen New York." "You have not seen it with me." Tessa studied him, and Xavier held his breath without quite knowing why. This felt important in a way that transcended a simple invitation. "Okay," Tessa finally said, "but I need to be back by tomorrow night. Jenna works Saturdays, but I do the story time for kids and I cannot miss that." "We will be back," Xavier promised. They took Xavier's car into the city the next morning, leaving before dawn to beat traffic. Tessa brought coffee in a thermos and a paper bag full of pastries from the bakery next to her apartment. They listened to music and talked easily, and Xavier realized he could not remember the last time he had felt this content, this present in a moment. They reached Manhattan as the sun was rising, turning the buildings to gold. Xavier watched Tessa watch the city, saw it through her eyes and felt something like pride. His office was in a sleek tower in Midtown, all glass and steel and expensive minimalist furniture. Tessa looked around the lobby with wide eyes. "This is where you work, most days. I have a meeting that should take a few hours. You can wait in my office, or there are shops and cafes nearby if you want to explore." "I will wait. I want to see your world." Xavier's assistant did a double take when he walked in with Tessa, but was professional enough not to comment. He installed Tessa in his office with access to the Wi-Fi and a view of the city, then went to handle his meeting. The meeting was contentious. The deal was worth hundreds of millions and was falling apart over details that should have been resolved weeks ago. Xavier moved through the negotiation with the practiced ease of someone who had done this countless times, but part of his mind kept drifting back to Tessa sitting in his office, to the life he had left in Connecticut. 3 hours later, he emerged with the deal salvaged and a headache forming behind his eyes. Tessa was sitting on the couch in his office, reading. She looked up when he entered. "How did it go?" "We saved it. For now." Xavier loosened his tie and dropped into his desk chair. "Sorry that took so long." "It is fine. I have been reading and people watching. Did you know your assistant has been dating the guy from accounting for 6 months, but they are keeping it secret?" "How could you possibly know that?" "I watched them interact in the break room. The way they look at each other when they think no one is paying attention." Tessa set her book aside. "You look stressed." "I am fine. You are clenching your jaw so hard I am surprised your teeth have not shattered." Xavier forced himself to relax. "It is just work." "It is just your entire life," Tessa corrected gently. "This is what you do every day. High-stakes meetings and million-dollar deals and constant pressure." "Yes." "Do you like it?" The question hung in the air. Xavier wanted to say yes, to defend the life he had built, but the word would not come. "I am good at it," he finally said. "That is not the same thing." Before Xavier could respond, his phone rang. His CFO calling about another crisis, another fire to put out. Xavier looked at the phone, then at Tessa, then back at the phone. He sent it to voicemail. Tessa's eyebrows rose. "Are you allowed to do that?" "I am the CEO. I can do whatever I want." Xavier stood and held out his hand. "Come on, let me show you something." He took her to his favorite spot in the city, a small park tucked between buildings where no tourists ever went. They bought hot pretzels from a cart and sat on a bench watching people pass by. "I used to come here when I was starting out," Xavier said. "When I was working 80-hour weeks and living on ramen and fear. I would sit here and look at those buildings and promise myself that one day I would own one of them. And now I do. I own 3 buildings within sight of this bench." "You achieved your dream," Tessa said. "I achieved my goal." "I am not sure it was ever a dream." Tessa was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think maybe we are looking for different things. You are looking for security and I am looking for meaning. Neither one is wrong, but they are not the same." "What if I want both?" Xavier asked. "Then you have to figure out what you are willing to sacrifice to get them." They spent the rest of the afternoon wandering the city. Xavier took Tessa to his favorite museum, a tiny gallery in Chelsea that showed experimental art. They had an early dinner at a restaurant Xavier loved, where the chef knew him by name. They walked through Times Square just so Tessa could roll her eyes at the tourist chaos. And somewhere during those hours, something shifted. Xavier found himself telling Tessa things he had never told anyone. About the fear that still woke him up at night, the fear of losing everything and ending up back where he started. About the loneliness of being at the top, where no one understood the pressure and everyone wanted something from you. About the nagging sense that he was missing something essential about being human. And Tessa listened with the same focused attention she gave to customers asking about books, and she did not offer easy answers or false reassurances. She just witnessed him, fully and without judgment. They drove back to Connecticut as darkness fell. Tessa fell asleep somewhere on the highway, her head tipped against the window, and Xavier drove through the night thinking about crossroads and choices, and the difference between the life you build and the life you want. He walked Tessa to her apartment, a second-floor walk-up above a dry cleaner. She paused at the door, key in hand. "Thank you for today," she said, "for showing me your world." "Thank you for seeing it clearly," Xavier replied. They stood there in the narrow hallway, close enough that Xavier could see the gold flecks in her gray-green eyes. The moment stretched, full of possibility. "I should go in," Tessa said, but she did not move. "Yes," Xavier agreed, also not moving. And then, because some moments demand courage, Xavier leaned in and kissed her. It was soft and questioning, a beginning rather than a declaration. Tessa made a small sound of surprise, then kissed him back, and Xavier felt something slot into place inside him, some piece of himself he had not known was missing. When they pulled apart, Tessa was smiling. "That was very unprofessional. I know. I apologize if I misread the situation." "You did not misread anything. I have wanted you to do that for days." She touched his cheek, a gentle gesture that made Xavier's breath catch. "But this complicates things. Everything is already complicated." "Fair point." Tessa dropped her hand and stepped back. "I need to think." "We both need to think. This is not just about us. It is about the bookshop and your life in New York and 1,000 practical considerations." "I know. Do you? Because I am not interested in being someone's small-town distraction. I am not interested in falling for someone who is going to leave." The words were direct and challenging, and Xavier respected her for them. "I would never treat you that way. You say that now, but you have a whole life somewhere else. A billion-dollar company, responsibilities. You cannot just walk away from that because you like kissing the bookshop girl." "You are not just the bookshop girl." "Then what am I?" Xavier did not have an answer, at least not one he could articulate standing in a dim hallway at midnight. So he said the only true thing he knew. "You are someone who makes me want to be different, better, more human." Tessa's expression softened. "That is a lot of pressure to put on one person." "I know. I am sorry." "Do not be sorry, just be sure. Figure out what you actually want, not what you think you should want, and then we can talk." She kissed him once more, brief and sweet, then disappeared into her apartment. Xavier drove to his hotel room and lay awake until dawn, thinking. The next day was Saturday, and Xavier showed up at the bookshop at 9 in the morning to help Tessa set up for story time. They did not talk about the kiss, moving around each other with careful politeness. The kids started arriving at 10. A dozen children between ages 4 and 8, dragging parents and stuffed animals and enough energy to power a small city. Tessa transformed for them, becoming animated and silly, doing voices for different characters and encouraging the kids to act out parts of the story. Xavier found himself pulled in to help. He was assigned to be a bear in the story, which required him to lumber around making growling noises while children shrieked with delighted terror. It was absurd and undignified and completely unlike anything he had ever done in his carefully constructed adult life. It was also the most fun he had had in years. After story time, a small girl approached him. She looked about 6, with serious eyes and braids tied with rainbow ribbons. "Are you Tessa's boyfriend?" she asked. "I am her friend," Xavier said carefully. "You like books. I am learning to." The girl considered this, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a battered paperback. "You should read this one. It is about a dragon who is scared of flying. It is good." She handed him the book with great solemnity, and Xavier accepted it with matching seriousness. "Thank you. I will read it." The girl nodded, satisfied, and ran off to rejoin her mother. Tessa had watched the entire exchange. When Xavier looked at her, she was smiling. "You just got a book recommendation from Emma. She is very particular. That is high praise. I am honored." Xavier looked at the book in his hands. It was worn and clearly beloved, the spine creased from multiple readings. "I will actually read it. I know you will." They spent the rest of the day working side by side, and the careful politeness gradually relaxed back into the easy comfort they had developed over the past weeks. By closing time, things felt almost normal again. "You want to get dinner?" Xavier asked as Tessa locked up. I cannot tonight. I have plans with friends. But tomorrow, Xavier agreed. He spent Saturday night in his hotel room, reading the book about the frightened dragon and thinking about fear and courage and learning to fly. Sunday dinner was at a small Thai restaurant that Tessa loved. They talked about everything except the thing they actually needed to talk about, dancing around the subject until finally Tessa set down her fork and said, "We need to have the actual conversation." "I know. So let us have it. What are you going to do about the bookshop?" Xavier had been thinking about this question for 2 weeks straight. He had run the numbers a dozen different ways. He had consulted with his advisors who all said the same thing: sell the property, take the money, move on. But he had also thought about mistakes written on walls and books as medicine, and a community that cared about stories. He had thought about Martin, a man he barely knew but who had somehow trusted him with something important. And he had thought about Tessa, about the way she moved through the world with intentional kindness, about the way she had made him question everything he thought he knew about success and meaning. "I want to keep it," Xavier said. "I want to keep the bookshop." Tessa went very still. "What?" "I want to keep it. I know it makes no financial sense. I know it will probably never make a real profit. But I think Martin left it to me because he wanted me to understand something that I had forgotten or maybe never knew, that there are things that matter beyond money. That being successful and being happy are not the same thing, that sometimes the right choice is not the profitable choice." "Xavier." Tessa's voice was soft. "You cannot keep a bookshop just because you have feelings for me. That is not a sustainable business model. I am not keeping it just because of you, although you are definitely part of the equation. I am keeping it because it is the right thing to do, because this place matters, because I want to invest in something that makes the world slightly better rather than just making me richer." He reached across the table and took her hand. "But yes, you are a significant factor, because you have shown me a different way of being in the world, and I want to explore that, if you are willing." Tessa looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "What does that actually look like?" "You cannot run a bookshop from Manhattan." "No. But I can restructure my company. I have been the hands-on CEO for 10 years. I have excellent people working for me. I can step back from the day-to-day operations and focus on strategy and major deals. I can work remotely most of the time. Come to New York once or twice a month for crucial meetings. You would do that. Leave New York. I am not leaving. I am expanding. I am choosing a life that has room for both my work and something else, something that matters in a different way." Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "I am not asking you to change your life. I am changing mine, because I want to, because you have made me want to." Tears were forming in Tessa's eyes. "That is a lot of pressure. You said that before. And you are right. I am not doing this for you. I am doing this for me. You just helped me see that I could." Tessa wiped her eyes, laughing a little. "I am going to add this to the mistake list. Made a billionaire have an existential crisis and restructure his entire life. Consequences unclear. That is not a mistake. We will see." But she was smiling as she said it, and she did not let go of his hand. They talked for hours, working through the practical realities. Xavier would return to New York for a few weeks to begin the restructuring process. He would hire a new CFO to handle operations. He would set up systems that allowed him to work remotely. It would be complicated and difficult and would require him to trust other people in ways he never had before. But it was possible. And more importantly, it was what he wanted. "What about us?" Tessa asked as they walked back to her apartment. "What are we doing here?" "I would like to date you," Xavier said. "Properly. I would like to take you to dinner and hold your hand and learn everything about you. I would like to see if this thing between us is as real as it feels. And if it does not work out, If we try this and fail, then we will have tried, and that will be better than spending the rest of our lives wondering what if. They had reached her building. Tessa turned to face him, and in the streetlight she looked young and uncertain and incredibly brave. "I am scared," she said. "I have not done this in a while, the whole falling for someone thing. I am not sure I remember how." "I do not think there is a how. I think you just do it and hope." That is terrifying advice from a businessman. "I am learning that some things cannot be optimized or strategized. Some things you just have to feel your way through." Tessa laughed, then kissed him, and this time it felt less like a question and more like an answer. Xavier returned to New York the next day to begin the complicated process of restructuring his life. It was harder than he had anticipated. His board was skeptical about his plan to step back from daily operations. His CFO thought he was having some kind of breakdown. His investors wanted reassurances that his priorities had not shifted away from maximizing returns. But Xavier pushed through, making changes that would have been unthinkable a month ago. He promoted his head of acquisitions to COO and gave her broad authority over operations. He restructured his schedule to allow for remote work. He set up systems and protocols that would allow him to manage his company from Connecticut. It took 3 weeks of intense work, but slowly things began to take shape. And during those weeks, Xavier talked to Tessa every night. Long phone conversations where they told each other about their days and made each other laugh and learned the small details that make up a life. He learned that Tessa was afraid of thunderstorms and loved terrible reality TV, and had once tried to become a vegetarian, but gave up after a week because she missed bacon too much. She learned that Xavier could play piano but never did anymore, and that he had a scar on his left shoulder from falling off his bike when he was 9, and that his favorite book as a child had been Where the Wild Things Are. They were building something, slowly and carefully, and Xavier had never been more terrified or more hopeful. He returned to Connecticut on a Friday in March, driving through rain that turned to snow as he moved north. Spring was reluctant this year, holding back as winter refused to give up its grip. Tessa met him at the bookshop. She was wearing her favorite cardigan and had flour in her hair from some baking disaster she explained about while he held her close and thought about how much he had missed her. "So," she said when they finally pulled apart, "you actually came back. Did you think I would not? Part of me worried that once you were back in your real life, this would all seem like a strange dream, that you would realize you were being irrational and change your mind." "This is my real life now," Xavier said. "Both parts of it. New York and here. Work and this. You." Tessa smiled, and Xavier thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. They spent the weekend together, figuring out the rhythms of being together. Xavier moved out of the hotel and into a furnished rental a few blocks from the bookshop. It was a far cry from his Manhattan penthouse, but it had good light and was close enough that he could walk to work, at a bookshop. If anyone had told Xavier 3 months ago that this would be his life, he would have thought they were insane. But here he was, shelving books and learning about inventory systems and helping Tessa plan an author event for a local mystery writer. Here he was, being happy. Of course, it was not all perfect. Xavier still had his company to run, and there were days when the demands of conference calls and strategic planning pulled him away from the bookshop. There were moments when he felt stretched thin, torn between two worlds that wanted different things from him. And there were moments when Tessa doubted when she looked at him, and he could see her thinking that this was temporary, that eventually he would realize what he had given up and resent her for it. But they worked through it, learning how to talk about the hard things, learning how to trust. Spring finally arrived, reluctant and beautiful. The bookshop's front window display changed from winter reads to gardening, books, and nature writing. Tessa planted flowers in the boxes outside, bright splashes of color that made the whole street look more alive. Xavier's mother's birthday came in April, and he found himself telling Tessa stories about her. About how she had worked so hard to give him opportunities. About how she had been so proud of him but also worried about him, worried that his drive for success would leave him lonely. "She would have liked you," Xavier said. They were having dinner in his apartment, a simple pasta dish that Tessa had taught him how to make. "She would have liked that you make me slow down and pay attention to things beyond work." "I wish I could have met her," Tessa said. "Me too." They were quiet for a moment, comfortable in the shared silence. Then Tessa said, "I added something to the mistake list today." "What?" Number 25. Fell in love with the billionaire who inherited the bookshop. Consequences still unfolding but outlook positive. Xavier's heart stuttered in his chest. "You love me." "I think I have loved you since you stayed that first week and actually tried to learn instead of just assuming you knew everything. I think I loved you when you played a bear for the story time kids. I definitely loved you when you told me you were keeping the bookshop." She met his eyes steadily. "I love you. And yes, it is terrifying and probably complicated, but I think the best things usually are." Xavier set down his fork and moved around the table to where she sat. He took her face in his hands and kissed her, trying to pour everything he felt into the gesture. "I love you too," he said when they finally broke apart. "I did not know I could feel like this. I did not know I was capable of this kind of happiness. You were always capable. You just needed permission to try." They made love for the first time that night, and it was tender and awkward and perfect in the way that first times are. Xavier learned the map of Tessa's body, the places that made her sigh, the places that made her laugh. And she learned him in return, bringing down the last of his carefully maintained walls. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, and Xavier thought that this, right here, was what Martin had wanted him to find. Not the bookshop itself, but what the bookshop represented. Connection. Community. Love. The messy, complicated beauty of being fully human. Summer arrived with warm breezes and long evenings. The bookshop stayed open later, and they added reading events in the small courtyard behind the building. Xavier found himself becoming part of the community in ways he had never experienced in New York. People knew his name. They asked about his day. They included him in their lives. He and Tessa fell into a rhythm, learning how to be together, learning when to give space and when to come close, learning how to support each other's dreams while also building something shared. Xavier's company continued to thrive under the new structure. Freed from the day-to-day operations, he was able to think more strategically, to make bigger picture decisions. And having distance from the constant pressure allowed him to see opportunities he had missed before. But the bookshop remained stubbornly unprofitable. Xavier poured money into it, not as an investment seeking return, but as a gift to something worth preserving. He upgraded the ancient computer system, fixed the leaky roof, started an online ordering system that helped them reach customers beyond Millbrook. And slowly, incrementally, things improved. Not dramatically, but enough to feel sustainable. In August, Xavier took Tessa to New York for a long weekend. He showed her his office, introduced her to his colleagues, took her to all his favorite places. And then, on Sunday morning, he took her to the park where they had sat on that first trip together. "I come from nothing," Xavier said, holding her hand as they watched the city wake up around them. "I built everything I have through force of will and refusal to accept failure. For a long time, I thought that was enough. I thought that winning was the same as living. And now," Tessa asked. "Now I know the difference. Now I know that the things that matter most cannot be bought or won. They can only be built slowly and carefully with people you love." He turned to face her fully. "I love you, Tessa Knight. I love the life we are building together. And I want to keep building it for the rest of my life." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple ring, a single stone on a delicate band. "Will you marry me?" Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "That is a very big question. I know. And you can take time to think about it. I just needed you to know that this is what I want, not someday or eventually. Now, you, us, forever." Tessa looked at the ring, then at Xavier, then back at the ring. Then she laughed, that genuine surprised sound that Xavier had come to love above all others. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course, yes. This might be the best mistake I have ever made, and I am absolutely adding it to the list." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed in the early morning light while the city moved around them, indifferent and beautiful. They were married in October, in the bookshop, surrounded by books and friends and the community that had become Xavier's unexpected home. Tessa wore a simple white dress and carried a bouquet of autumn flowers. Xavier wore a dark suit and could not stop smiling. Emma, the serious little girl who had given Xavier his first book recommendation, was the flower girl. She took her job very seriously, scattering petals with great concentration. The ceremony was short and heartfelt. They wrote their own vows, promising to choose each other every day, to build a life based on love and honesty and the courage to keep growing. When they kissed as married people, the room erupted in cheers and applause, and Xavier thought that his Uncle Martin, wherever he was probably smiling. The reception was in the courtyard behind the bookshop, with string lights and good food and dancing. Xavier's colleagues from New York mingled with Tessa's friends from Millbrook, and somehow everyone got along perfectly. Late in the evening, when things were winding down, Tessa pulled Xavier to the mistake list, which still hung on the wall behind the counter. "Number 26, she said, and added in careful letters, "Married a billionaire in a bookshop, best mistake of my entire life." Xavier kissed her temple. Not a mistake, definitely a mistake, but the right kind. They spent their wedding night in Xavier's apartment, which had gradually become their apartment. In the morning, they would leave for a honeymoon in Italy, 2 weeks of wine and history and time to simply be together. But for now, they stood at the window looking out at the quiet street, at the bookshop lit up below them, and thought about the strange path that had brought them to this moment. "You ever regret it?" Tessa asked quietly. "Giving up the life you had before?" "I did not give anything up," Xavier said. "I gained everything. I gained you. I gained a life that feels real. I gained the ability to be happy. That is not sacrifice, that is evolution. Very philosophical for a billionaire. I learned from the best." They stood there a while longer, wrapped in each other and in the quiet joy of new beginning. Life continued its forward momentum. Xavier and Tessa returned from their honeymoon sun-kissed and happy and ready to build their future. They started talking about children, about expanding the bookshop, about all the possibilities that stretched ahead. In December, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. They told everyone at the annual bookshop holiday party. And Emma, the serious flower girl, declared that she would teach the baby everything important about books. Xavier found that he had no anxiety about becoming a father, only excitement. Tessa was the opposite, full of worries about doing everything right, until Xavier reminded her that they would figure it out together, the way they figured out everything. The baby, a girl, was born the following August. They named her Marion after Martin and Sarah after his wife. Marion Sarah Ramsey came into the world with her mother's gray-green eyes and her father's dark hair, and a seemingly infinite capacity, for demanding attention. Xavier fell in love all over again, with his daughter and with his wife, and with the impossible beautiful mess of family. When Marion was 6 months old, they took her to the bookshop for the first time during business hours. Tessa wore her in a carrier while shelving returns, and Xavier held customer consultations with his daughter sleeping on his shoulder. Emma, now 8 and still serious, announced that Marion was acceptable and would probably be a good reader when she got older. The years passed with the strange acceleration that happens when you are happy. Marion grew from baby to toddler to little girl. Xavier's company continued to thrive under his modified leadership. The bookshop remained a beloved community fixture, still barely profitable but undeniably important. When Marion was 3, they had a son. James Martin Ramsey was louder than his sister had been, more demanding, but equally beloved. The apartment became chaotic with toys and children's books, and the wonderful, exhausting reality of raising small humans. Xavier reduced his work hours even further, choosing time with his family over deals and meetings. Some of his former colleagues thought he had lost his edge. Xavier knew he had simply found something better. One evening when Marion was 7 and James was 4, the family was in the bookshop after closing. Xavier was reading to James in the children's section, while Tessa helped Marion pick out new books and straighten displays. Marion paused in front of the mistake list, which still hung on the wall, now faded and curled at the edges but preserved as a kind of shop tradition. "Mama, what is this?" Marion asked. Tessa came over and looked at the list, at all those small confessions of imperfection that had accumulated over the years. Number 27 through 40-something now, new mistakes added regularly. "It is a list of all the mistakes I made working here," Tessa explained. "Your Uncle Martin started it as a way to remind me that making mistakes is okay, that we do not have to be perfect to be good." Marion studied the list carefully, her serious expression reminiscent of Emma all those years ago. "What is number 26? Tessa smiled. "Married a billionaire in a bookshop. Best mistake of my entire life. Papa is the billionaire." "Yes. But that is not really a mistake, is it?" "No, baby. That is a very good thing pretending to be a mistake." Marion considered this, then said, "Can I make a list like this when I am older?" "You can make whatever kind of list you want," Tessa said, hugging her daughter close. "The point is not the mistakes. The point is being honest about being human." Xavier watched his wife and daughter from across the shop. His son cuddled against his side, and felt the kind of bone-deep contentment that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be. Later, after the children were in bed and he and Tessa were cleaning up the inevitable chaos of family dinner, Xavier said, "I have been thinking about what happens to this place eventually, when we are old and retired and Marion and James are grown. That is very long-term planning, even for you. I want to set it up as a trust, keep it in the family but also protect it, make sure it can never be sold or demolished, make sure it stays a bookshop forever, or at least as close to forever as we can manage." Tessa set down the dish she was washing and turned to face him. "You want to preserve it. I want to honor what Martin created and what you maintain. I want to make sure that decades from now, people can still come here and find the books they need and add their mistakes to a list on the wall and be part of something that matters. That is very sentimental for a ruthless businessman. I was never ruthless. I was just scared and lonely and using money to feel safe." Xavier pulled Tessa close. "You taught me that there are better ways to be safe, that connection and community and love are worth more than any building I could ever buy." "I love you," Tessa said. "I love the person you have become. I love the life we have built. I love you too, and I love that we built it together." They stood in their kitchen, holding each other, and thought about all the unlikely events that had brought them to this moment. An inheritance from a near stranger, a list of mistakes on a wall. The courage to choose something different. Marion came padding into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. I could not sleep. Come here, baby, Tessa said, scooping her up even though she was getting too big to be scooped easily. Marion settled between her parents, and Xavier wrapped his arms around both of them. Tell me the story, Marion said, a familiar request. Which story? Tessa asked, though she knew. The story about how you and Papa met. So Xavier and Tessa told the story together, the way they had told it dozens of times before. About a billionaire who inherited a bookshop and did not know what to do with it. About a woman who managed the store and had her mistakes written on the wall. About how they taught each other different ways of being in the world. And they lived happily ever after, Marion asked when they finished, even though she knew the answer. They are living happily ever after right now, Xavier said. Every day, this is the happily ever after. Marion seemed satisfied with this answer and let herself be carried back to bed. Later, much later, Xavier stood in the bookshop alone. It was past midnight and the street outside was quiet. He looked at the mistake list, at all those small admissions of humanity. Then he found a marker and added one more line at the bottom. Xavier's first mistake. Thought success meant winning. Best correction. Learning that success means love. He stood back and looked at his contribution to the list, then smiled and turned off the lights. Outside, snow had begun to fall, dusting the street in white. Xavier walked home through the quiet town, past darkened shops and sleeping houses, thinking about unlikely inheritances and the courage to change. When he climbed into bed beside Tessa, she stirred and reached for him without waking. Xavier held her close and listened to the sounds of his children breathing in the next room and the old building settling around them. This was his empire now. Not glass towers and profit margins, but this. Family and community and a bookshop full of stories. A life built on love and mistakes and the willingness to keep growing. His Uncle Martin had given him more than a building. He had given him a chance to become someone different, someone better, someone capable of being truly happy, and Xavier had taken that chance and built a life around it. The snow continued to fall outside, and inside, the family slept, and the bookshop stood on its corner waiting for morning when it would open its doors once again to people seeking stories and connection, and the particular kind of magic that only books can provide. Years from now, Marion would take over management of the store, adding her own entries to the mistake list and her own vision for what the bookshop could be. James would become a teacher, bringing his students to the shop for field trips and special events. Xavier would eventually retire fully from his company, spending his days reading and helping in the store and being absurdly proud of his children. And Tessa would continue to match people with books, to offer comfort through stories, to maintain the legacy that Martin had started and that she had helped Xavier understand. But all of that was future. For now, there was just this moment, this perfect ordinary moment of a family sleeping and a bookshop waiting and snow falling on a quiet Connecticut street. It was enough. It was everything. And if you were to ask Xavier Ramsey, billionaire and bookshop owner, husband and father, what his greatest achievement was, he would not mention his company or his wealth or any of the deals that had made him successful in the traditional sense. He would point to the bookshop, to the family sleeping upstairs, to the list of mistakes on the wall, and say that his greatest achievement was learning how to be human, learning how to love, learning that the best inheritance is not money or property, but the courage to build a life that matters. And that would be the truth.